When I think of domestic violence, really, I think of violence that occurs in the home among family members. And we do know that there's a problem with violence, family violence, not only in Barbados, but across the world. And when I think of family violence, it's the abuse, spousal abuse, it's the abuse of sibling abuse, child abuse, where, parent-child situations, and of course elder abuse. So it is a domestic violence issue, and it's one of those things that we need to address in our society. And if I could add to that, because when we think of abuse, it's not an accidental injury thing. There are those intended acts of violence, deliberate, and then of course when it comes to neglect, there are those that are non-intentional, but nonetheless those negligent acts can cause harm, and therefore they're also abusive. Violence in the home tends to be hidden, particularly in our society where we say that we are very individualistic and we are private, and the home is a private sphere of individuals. So not many people want to intrude on the lives of people when it comes to their home business, particularly in our part of the world, in the Western world. So what happens behind closed doors, very few people do know, particularly abuse. The physical abuse might be more talked about, but certainly any sexual abuse and neglect, and so a lot of that is hidden, and the emotional abuse is hidden a lot. So unless a family member speaks out, or a family friend who's aware of the situation, or in the case of the elderly, they would really need someone to speak out on their behalf, or unless they complain to someone. It's like the elderly are just as vulnerable as children. So the same thing happens with children. They have to find someone they can trust, or they will have to say, complain to someone that this is happening. Otherwise, no one knows what's happening behind closed doors. The person who takes a child, for example, or the elderly person to the doctor, can always say, give another reason why the person has a bruise or why the person is behaving that way. They may not be honest in terms of saying, well, of course, because it's a crime to inflict harm and injury on anyone deliberately. We know many elderly people also suffer from dementia, but every human being has feelings, so although they may not be able to articulate and the brain doesn't work the same way, when pain is inflicted on the person, they recoil, and they know that pain is not a healthy thing to have happen to them. So even if an elderly person has, say, dementia, Alzheimer's, and many times those are the people who are abused as well, because they're confused, their thoughts are confused, and people think, oh, nobody will believe her, nobody knows, nobody will think that she's really telling the truth. And there are also those individuals with that problem, those elderly persons, who become most troublesome as well. And therefore they are at risk. But to put myself in the shoes of an elderly person who's at risk for abuse, I would be fearful. And there are older people who are fearful. My dad is 95, my mom is 90. God has been good to them. They still have their wits and their faculties about them. But yet I'm protective of them, because I would not want them to be abused in any way. I mean, recently, and I will share this with you this week, we have a neighbor, a young man, and he wants to park his car where he wants to park his car. And my mom had a can there where she collected, garbage. And so she had moved it to put it back, but he wants to park his car there, and it's on her property. And he moved the can, and she told him not to move it, and he kicked it away. And she told him, I told you not to kick my can away, and he kicked it away. And I thought that was an abusive act. I said, because it's an elderly person, you're in your late 30s as a young man, and if an elderly person, that's her property, whether he thinks a garbage can is property or not, It's her property on her property, and for him to do that, I thought was really abusive. I still plan to speak to him, and I'm going to say to him that what he did was an act of abuse. But of course, my mom at 90 is still feisty, so she called the police. So, but yes, you know, people who are elderly can live in fear from someone like that, because some young people, middle-aged too, will bully elderly people, you know, because they know that they are fairly defenseless. You know, when you really think of them living alone, you know, not many people are going to take advantage of my parents because I live next door and I have a, you know, I'm assertive, I'll speak out. And my mom is still assertive, though she's elderly. But some elderly people do not. They feel dependent, they recoil, and fearful. They become afraid, and they don't know what to do. And then they begin to feel all alone, and who will help them, and that kind of thing. So, you know, I'm aging too, and as I age, I'm very much aware of what can happen. Because as a society, we have not been really teaching our young people to respect the elderly. We have not been. We're now really trying to get them to respect the rights of children. But we need them also to respect the rights of the disabled, the rights of the elderly, the rights of all vulnerable groups. I do some public speaking. I speak to church groups and any other group that will ask me to come and make a presentation, I'm always ready to do so. I do some writing on family violence. I have not written on violence against the elderly, but certainly it's another area that I can add to my areas of interest. And because I feel very passionate about it, I've always grown up with elderly people, you know, and they've been very dear to me, and I like the experience that they gave, and you know, like I said, my parents live next door, and they're elderly, and what they do, you know, I often say to my siblings, but you know, sometimes I get a little bit frustrated with them. I'm cool with them. I said, how do you think I survive? Because I'm cool with them. I let them do their own thing. And I think we need to understand that we're all going to get, if we don't die young and make a beautiful corpse, then of course we will become old, and we have to decide which we want to be. And if we think of growing old ourselves, then of course we will want to understand that we have to value our seniors, value the experience and the knowledge that they have, and recognize that until they part this world through death, that they need to be taken very good care of, whether in their homes or whether they're in institutions. Because we do know that there's a lot of institutional abuse, as you would have heard recently in the media. And for caregivers who do it, and for those who stand by and watch it being done, they are just as guilty because they have colluded with the person who is performing the act, and more so, they have neglected to intervene, so it's negligence on their part. And so there's a lot that can be done. We can write newspaper articles, we use Facebook, where we have to reach the young people now through the social media. But I know that talking to church groups is a great way to also spread that information around, wherever you can sensitize people to the problem. But we need to get it out there, we need to put it in the media, but we also need to talk to people face to face. And I didn't mention kids in school, but I think the time has come for us to really talk to children in school about respect for the elderly. You know, and there are few schools who would engage retirees in the programs of the schools as a way to get children to respect older persons. And we need to do more than that, because, you know, we need to have children converted from early to understand that they must respect everyone. Not necessarily their peers only, because many times young people think only young people matter, but older people do matter. Older people can be quite stubborn, to be honest. They can be quite independent, and I think sometimes we forget. My parents remind me every day. I'm glad that I'm with them, because they remind me every day, for example, that they still have their wits about them, and no child of theirs will tell them what to do, that they are independent. This morning I left home and I said to my mom, I said, do you want me to do so? So she says, when I can't do it anymore, then you can do it. But right now, I will take take control in what I have to do. And some people don't have that kind of patience. They don't understand their independence. They don't understand that all the persons do not want you to move things out of place. They don't want their comfort zone disrupted. If they have visual problems, they may not want you to move something, and then they fret. And because they fret, people get annoyed. But you have to think of why is the person fretting, and just something, rather than become aggressive with them, just kind of comfort them. Intervene in a way that you help them to say, look, okay, calm down. You don't need to be upset about this. You don't need to be upset about that. Sometimes I even go to the point of saying, you're older now. You need to just be calmer. There's no need for all of this excitement and fretting at your age. Life you can enjoy your last few days on this earth in a much calmer way if they begin to get upset about anything, whatever that may be. They can be what we call miserable. Okay? But that's only from our point of view. We need to know what's going on with them. Okay, sometimes people don't understand, and as one person said to me recently, that they didn't understand that their mother was moving into dementia. Only now that she has full-blown dementia does she understand now the signs that she missed all along the way. So she said when she thought her mother was doing things that were odd, and she felt, oh, my mother is so disgusting. Now she's recognized that there were changes mentally happening and physically with the hormone imbalances and everything happening with her mother. And that was something she said to me only this past weekend. And so it means that we too have to understand what's happening with them, and that they're saying things. It's not always off the wall. If they say, well, I had this and I can't find it anywhere, they may blame you. Don't have to get upset because they blame you. And if you know that they're at the point of beginning dementia, then you know they're going to blame you. It's a natural part of that disease. So we need to be patient. I think it demands patience. Okay, they may wet the house, they may spill things in the house because sometimes their hands are not steady. They may occasionally stool their clothes. They may go to the bathroom, they're not flush it. Are you going to beat them for doing that? Or are you going to be understanding that, look at the age of this person. I do not know what it would be like for me when I'm 70. I often say that to myself. I do not know what it would be like to be 80. I don't know what it is like to be 90. So why would I be taking advantage of someone who's older? Because I don't know their struggles. I don't know what they're going through mentally and physically. And very few older people deliberately do things. And sometimes if they said, oh, they did it on purpose, it's because perhaps the young adult has frustrated them. And we can frustrate them in the way that we treat them as well. So you don't wake up thinking, I'm going to beat my mother or my grandmother today. But when you are exasperated about your own issues, your own problems, you can lose control. And it's the same thing that happens with child abuse. Nobody wakes up saying, I'm going to kill that child, I'm going to beat him to death. But mind you, depending on how society sees it too, because if we accept, and what we have accepted in our society is this thing of hitting and beating to correct people, to take control and that kind of thing. And if we practice that, we practice it with our children, we practice it among each other as adults. That's why you have the spousal abuse. It's automatic we're going to practice it with our elderly. Because in our society, to be honest, we have a problem with spousal abuse. We know that the research says it's pervasive throughout the Caribbean. It's a global problem, but in some parts of the world it's more pervasive than others, and in the Caribbean it's pervasive. The same thing with child abuse, and I'm sure the same thing goes for elder abuse. The research is not as prevalent. We don't have as much research on elder abuse within a Caribbean context, but I'm sure the spillover is there. Okay? Because we have so many abuses against the elderly in terms of what people do with them in their homes. They get them to do their wills, they sign over their wills, and then they get put out of their homes. And I've known of some of those cases. Okay? The children put them out of their own homes. The daughters-in-law will put them out. But they would encourage the older person to make a will, and as soon as the older person has made the will in their name, and they don't want any problems for that older person, if they don't put them out, when that older person goes to hospital and they feel that the care is going to be quite involved, when that older person returns home, they leave them to languish in the hospital, and from there into a district hospital, and then they hardly go and take care of the person in the district hospital setting, or even bring them back home and care for them. Sometimes I wonder if they don't have a conscience, and sometimes I don't think that people recognize, well, this is my mom, this is my dad, I would not have been in this world without this person, they cared for me as a child, and why am I now going to treat them otherwise? But it's that the hitting, it's not only the physical hitting, that's what I'm saying. It's not only the physical abuse, but it's that kind of emotional abuse that the elderly suffer. And people call them nasty, and people tell them that they're old and wicked, and they don't want to hear that, especially from a family member, And strangers, of course, will do it. I have not worked in an institution for the elderly, but I can imagine that not every caregiver is there because they have an interest in looking after that older person. So that when the older person says, come, because sometimes that's all they may say, that they could probably ignore the come. But there's nothing wrong if you're available to just go and say, okay, what's happening? And calm that person down. So I believe they're ignored a whole lot too in many of the institutions that we have around. I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but if we understand how institutions work, we know that employed within institutions are some really good caretaking staff. But then you also have some oddballs. And some of those oddballs are there. They don't like what they're doing, but they don't want to leave because they need the salary. But they never think of the hurt that they are inflicting on others. And I often said, coming from a Christian perspective, do unto others as you would that they should do to you. But more than that, that whatever you have done will come back to you one day. And when you are facing adversity or life is not so bright for you, you may not reflect on the fact that you have been unkind to another innocent person, and now this is happening to you as well, so that you can understand what hurt is about. The important thing is, if you can remove the person from that setting, you do it. Let's say if you have a grandmother, you're the grandchild, but she's living with another grandchild who is abusing her. There's nothing wrong with saying, I am going to take my grandmother to live with me. And they may want to defy you, but sometimes what some people do not do, they will say, well, you're living in the house, so I'm not taking her out. But you have to be careful as to who you think you're hurting. You're not hurting the able-bodied adult or the younger person, but it's really that older person. So if you feel in your heart that the person is being ill-treated and you can do anything, whether it's removing them yourself from that situation, or whether it's reporting it to the authorities, if you're just a neighbor or a friend of the family, you have a legal responsibility to do so. We cannot ignore abuse in our society. We ignore the abuse of children. We ignore abuse, intimate partner violence. We ignore that. We say, oh, let them get on with it. And sometimes we say, well, that's her child. If she's going to let her child treat her like that, or that's their mother, I'm not interested. That's, we're turning a blind eye. And that happens a lot. We often say, oh, they would handle that. And or sometimes you have some people who know it's happening, and then they say, that's none of my business. She's too miserable anyhow, so maybe she's getting what she deserves. But we always have to remember, abuse, whether it is physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, whatever, neglect, that we have to intervene and do something about it. Again, what I want to reiterate is the fact that there are some vulnerable groups in our society, and the elderly as a group falls into the category of vulnerable, because in many ways they are defenseless. As they get older, they don't have their faculties about them to make the kind of decisions that they need to make. Many of them are not fully able-bodied. I mean, they begin to lose their vitality, they have the arthritis. Some of them are bedridden, they can't move out of their beds. And therefore, if you're in your home and you cannot move out of your bed, you are dependent upon people to give you the kind of care to keep you from having the bed sores, to give you the fresh air, to give you the good nutrition and all of that. And because failure to give them good nutrition, if you can afford it, is also abusive. So, we really need to begin to understand that we have a responsibility as a society to do more than we are currently doing. We have a responsibility to understand what is indeed abuse, and we have to understand that there are different groups in society. I mentioned the disabled earlier, I mentioned the elderly, who, because of their special circumstances, can really place them at risk for abuse. And wherever we encounter any of these persons, whether as a group or as an individual, if we call ourselves a caring society, then we cannot let abuse continue. We must call it by its right name, and we must report it. We must call it the violence that it is. Whether, as I said, whether it's with a child, whether it's with between partners, whether it is wherever, even societal violence, we have to call it by its name. We need to be more caring, and that caring means we have to look out for each other. As I said earlier, we should do unto others as we would that they should do to us.
This is an EU-funded project.